sent from the Father to be our Savior, set above all things, first place on earth. You gave your life to give life eternal. There is no gift more precious than this. Jesus, Jesus, Lord of earth and heaven, always was and always will be, name above all names. Every nation, every people will bow before you, proclaiming you, Lord. There's none beside you who is more worthy to receive honor, glory, and power. Jesus, Jesus, Lord of earth and heaven, always was and always will be, name above all names. One with the Father, one with the Spirit, risen victorious, conquering death. You hold the key to life everlasting. Praise to the Son, redeeming Lord. Jesus, Jesus, Lord of earth and heaven, always was and always will be, name above all names, name above all names. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Rebecca. As you know, to be a Christian means to believe in God, and not just any God, not just any belief as though all faiths were the same, not, well, as long as you believe something, what difference does it make? Not that, or all the other garbage that you hear these days. But belief in the particular God that we have come to understand in Jesus of Nazareth. He is the one who came to reveal to us God's true nature. And when you think of it that way, the gospel becomes a rather beautiful and comforting story, because this man Jesus, if you looked at his life, was so caring and so gentle, going around teaching and preaching and healing, a blessing to everyone he met, regardless of who they were. And so we can say to ourselves, this is the way God is. Not cruel, not judging, not harsh, not mean, but caring and lifting and loving. It's a beautiful thing to believe in God. But sooner or later, somebody's going to say to you, then what happened to Jesus? And you have to tell the truth. He was sentenced to die, and he was executed. He was about 33 years old when he died. He was executed by the Roman government in order to maintain the peace of Rome. He seemed to be to them a threat, a disturber of the peace, a gatherer of poor people with some dangerous ideas. And it was expedient that he die, and that was that. His means of execution was not a lethal injection or the gas chamber. Instead, he was hanged on a stick, a cross, where he was left to die. It took some people who were executed by this means several hours to die. It took others days. Mercifully, we are told Jesus died within a few hours. And when you answer the question about what happened to Jesus, this beautiful, kind, caring, gentle man, and you tell the truth, some people walk away. They're not interested in a man who died like that. And they're not interested in any group that centers itself around such an event. Why can't we just leave that part out, they say. Leave out all this cross business. Why can't we just tell the stories about Jesus healing and touching and teaching and preaching? Why can't, as some people have done, take the best teachings of Jesus and the best teachings of Gandhi or Muhammad or Confucius or Buddha and put them all together and call it a way of life? Why not say, now this is the way to live, have a good family, have good relationships, be wealthy, successful, and wise, and leave out all this cross business? Which led Paul to say, no. I preach Christ and Christ crucified. Because you see, the truth is, without the cross, there's no gospel. We hear about people, especially in the entertainment industry, who have left their churches to join some cult, like Scientology, for instance. And they testify to receiving what they didn't get in their traditional churches, a sense of comfort and health and coping and healing. But there are no crosses. As the theologian Reinhold Niebuhr said some years ago from New York, where he taught at Union Theological, this is a view that insists on a God without wrath, bringing men and women without sin into a kingdom without judgment through a Christ without a cross. And Paul said, I cannot do that. I cannot do that. I cannot give up the truth that I have resolved to know nothing among you but Jesus Christ and Him crucified. And Paul paid a dear price for that conviction. And when he went to Corinth, in today's text, he says, I arrived among you shaking, scared, and feeling very weak. Because you see, he had just come from Athens, which was the cultural center of the world at that time. Greece, Athens, Greece, where you would find the best sculpture and art and music and poetry and philosophy, all unsurpassed. And Paul stood there on a little hill and preached about Jesus. And his listeners treated him in the worst way any preacher could ever be treated. They laughed at him. And Paul said, I have to tell of the cross. I have to preach the cross, even though the culture regards it as something foolish that makes no sense. Where was Jesus when he was killed? He was in Jerusalem. Did he live there? No. He was from Nazareth, a town about 80 miles north. Then why did he go there? He did all this good work, and he taught, and he healed, and he went to Jerusalem, knowing what was going to happen, and his followers ran away like crazy, but he stayed there in Jerusalem. How foolish can you get? Did he not know the danger? Had he not received the threats? Did he not know what was going to happen? Why didn't he leave? Talk about senseless killing. Jesus' death, from one perspective, makes absolutely no sense. Philip Reif once observed at the University of Chicago, quote, "Any church or preacher who keeps preaching on the cross is not going to grow. The preacher will not be a success, and the church will not grow, because in our culture, what we are interested in is success, not sacrifice." If you talk about sacrifice at your church, you're going to sit there with your little huddle of people like a covey of quail, while all the other churches will be blooming all around and promising that if you give God a nickel, God will give you back a dime. And those churches say that the way to health and wealth and happiness is to come to Jesus. That's what the architect was told when he started designing one of those huge churches out in California. It said they told him, "We don't want any crosses on this church, either inside or outside, none. We don't want anybody think of failure and weakness. Why would we want a symbol of a man slumped dead on a cross after his few friends had gotten out of Dodge?" All that were left were a few women crying. You talk about weakness. What does that do? Oh, the Ku Klux Klan, they knew what to do with this cross. This weak, dying stuff. They put on their white hoods, and they rode into neighborhoods, and they put one of those crosses in a yard and set it on fire. You can hear the screaming of children. The Klan knows how to take that weak cross and turn it into terrifying and vicious power. In 1977, a pastor in San Francisco got up before his congregation and said, "The cross has been the symbol of sacrifice and the acceptance of pain and suffering, and we're tired of it. We're not going to be a part of it anymore." And he got up there and he tore the cross down from his church. You see, no more suffering, no more weakness. And Paul said, "I have to preach the cross." Why? Well, let me introduce the answer to that question by saying I don't know. From here on, what I'm about to say to you is what I think. I think that the cross is, first of all, a reminder. And I'm sorry we have to have it. The cross is a reminder of the cruelty and the violence and the sin in this world that affects people who had nothing to do with it. I have seen these children's faces on my television set, and their parents trying to escape the violence and the bloodshed and the insane cruelty in the countries of their birth, spending every cent they have just for a seat on some flimsy boat to cross the dangerous waters for freedom. And I have seen the wealthy, frightened people stand on the shore and say to them, "No, not here. You can't come here." Even in high places, proper places, white-collar places, there are a lot of ugly, cruel, and evil powers that crush and hurt people. And you know this is so. I'm not telling you anything new. We need to be reminded, I think, that just because people have been to school and just because they have a nice income and live in a better part of town, and just because they are children of some of the best families, they can still be responsible for some of the ugliest cruelty in this world. At the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C., you will find flags flying inside that beautiful place from every state in the Union. And these flags, each flag there represents some person from one of those states. In recent years, there have been 3 flags from the state of Georgia, for instance. One of those flags was for Martin Luther King Jr. One of those was from Woodrow Wilson, who had begun his law career in Georgia and married a woman from Rome, Georgia. And one was for a man named Robert Alston. Now you may ask, who was Robert Alston? Robert Alston was from Atlanta, and he owned the land that is now the East Lake Golf and Country Club. But in those days, he was a member of the Georgia legislature, and he was absolutely horrified at the corruption in the legislative body of Georgia. One item in particular offended him. But see, it was the custom in those days for wealthy and influential people to use state prisoners to work on their mansions or build their commercial buildings or farm their plantations. All you had to do was provide lunch. You didn't have to house them or pay them. You could work them from dusk till dawn if you wanted to. You were not obligated to provide insurance. All you had to provide was lunch. And did you know that a lot of the fine old buildings and nice old homes in Atlanta, Georgia were built on the back of prisoners who were hauled out of prison and worked all day for the wage of a lunch? And Robert Alston said, this is not right. He said, this is worse than slavery. He spoke to his fellow legislators, but no one else seemed interested because they were making money. And their wives were sipping drinks at the country club because of the system. And so Robert Alston announced, tomorrow I will introduce a bill into the legislature to make this practice against the law because it is inhumane. And that morning he came to work with this bill. And a fellow legislator from one of the nice families came over to Robert Alston and said to him, Mr. Alston, are you going to introduce your bill today? And he said, yes, I am. And the man reached inside his coat and pulled out a pistol and shot him in the head, dead. Killed because of something he learned in Sunday school. I don't know this for sure, but I think Paul has to preach the cross to say this is not only the way the world is, but this is how a Christian is supposed to be. That a Christian says to be a Christian means that you get involved in people's lives, sometimes at risk to your name or your reputation or to your fortune. And you get involved because that's what Christ called us to do. Folks, they are lying to you on the radio or the television or any other pulpit when they say, if you just believe in God, your life is going to be a bed of roses. No problems, no sacrifice. That's a lie. If you believe in God, that sometimes is when your trouble starts. One day Jesus said to his disciples, if I recall, get into this boat and go to the other side of the lake. And they did exactly what he said, and they hit a storm. It wasn't because they disobeyed that they hit a storm. It was because they obeyed. Believing in God sometimes means putting yourselves in situations that cause you to think, well, why did I do that? I thought God blesses you when you do right. Because of their faith, some people have stopped the mouths of lions, won wars, raised the dead, had every kind of triumph in the world. But other people, because of their faith in God, have suffered, and they have been chased and pushed and hurt and talked against and imprisoned simply because of their faith. Faith is not a success story. Faith is a story that says, I choose to take this up as my way of life. But I think the primary reason Paul had to preach the cross, the most important reason, is because the cross tells us how God is. that we worship a God who identifies with human suffering, who comes to us and suffers with us, and that sympathy is extraordinarily powerful. Some years ago when I was in college, a Greek author by the name of Nikos Kazantzakis wrote a little book called The Last Temptation of Christ. Some of you may remember that book. It was later made into a very controversial movie that was picketed and boycotted all over the country. But in this book, Kazantzakis imagined what would it have been like if when Jesus had gotten to Jerusalem and it was tightening around his neck and there was no way out and death was in front of him, what if he thought, why don't I just go back to Nazareth, marry, have a family, take up carpentry again, and get out of all this? Nobody seems to care anyway. But if Jesus had done that, you see, if he had slipped out of town and gone back to Nazareth and married and had children and lived like anybody else, would we be able to sing what a friend we have in Jesus? No. If he had skipped out before the pain started, but he didn't do that. He knew what was in front of him, and he went anyway. Oh, Jesus, but you're a victim. They took your life. No. Nobody took my life. I gave my life. Sometimes a child falls down and skins a knee or an elbow and runs crying to his mother. The mother picks up that child and says, in what is the oldest myth in the world, let me kiss it and make it well. As if there's some magic in her saliva or something. And she picks up that child and kisses the skin place and holds the child in her lap. And all is well. Did the kiss make it well? I believe it was that 10 minutes in the lap that made the difference, don't you? Just sit there in the lap of love and see that mother crying. Mother, why are you crying? I'm the one who hurt my elbow. Because you hurt, she says. I hurt. That does more for a child than all the bandages and all the medicine in the world just sitting on the lap. So what is the cross? Can I say it this way? To come to the cross is to sit for a few moments in the lap of God himself, who hurts because you hurt. And Paul said, I have to preach that. And so do I. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. I'm going to close this morning with the beautiful hymn of sacrifice, When I Survey the Wondrous Cross. And as we stand and sing these beautiful words, let us recommit ourselves to the gospel of Jesus Christ. And if there is someone here today who needs to come and pray at our chancel rail during the singing of this hymn, you're more than welcome to come. Or perhaps you're here this morning and making a decision to become a part of our church family and to join us in our ministry together. You're welcome to come. Let's stand and sing number 298.
My
in your believing, that you may abound in hope and the power of the Holy Spirit.